Greetings and good Wednesday morning, the 25th of January 2023, third decade of the 21st century. Granted, if you're new to my channel, that's how I always open. I do that as a means to sort of expose the fact that it is indeed the third decade of the 21st century, as opposed to where people had predicted us to be, what they thought our society would be doing versus what it is we're talking about and what sort of issues we're facing. That being said, if you're also new to my channel, I'm a big fan of increasing conversation. That's basically the whole reason I started this channel. Anything from socio-political to geeking out, getting nerdy, getting meta. This video is a read, react, and response video. Nothing out of the normal for my channel. My one loyal viewer and responder, Stace Catalan, took the time to watch and respond to a couple of my videos that sort of thread the needle between socio-political, geeky, nerdy, meta. So this read and reaction will be a bit of a combination. So the first response is in relationship to a video I posted where Stace and I have been going back and forth about, I guess you could say, before I get into the read and reaction, I kind of sort of work in education, although not really. My wife works in education, and listening to her discuss her days after work, you know, not being there, not knowing all the different facets, it brings up a lot of different questions. A, how many different angles do we need to analyze when it sometimes just is what it is? You know, and pick a topic. Kids need to behave in class, regardless. Kids need to behave in class. I mean, is that a rock solid? You know, I don't know. And Stace and I may have some different views on it. We don't seem to be arguing, which is also the other purpose of this channel. We can disagree. If need be, we can disagree vigorously. But it's not to be inhumane to one another or demonize one another. And we've kind of had this conversation going back and forth in video format, discussing some of the finer points of the modern day educational system. Granted, my view is very myopic. It's often third person through the lens of my wife working in one singular school district. With that being said, as the conversation's been going on, Stace responded, also starts to make me wonder how many of these kids that are getting diagnosed with ADHD are just actually gifted and are bored within the classrooms. That is a valid point, because what I learned from my time as an individual, all right, I'll be 47 this year. I've been out of high school since 1994. I had some teachers I connected with. I had some teachers I did not. Some of the teachers I did not connect with, other students did. It's the wonderful dynamics of the human condition. Unfortunately, what I remember as a young individual was I may have had a little bit of liberty to pick and choose my teachers within reason. But at the same time, it was also just sort of accepted, you get who you get. And it was, call it a character building exercise, call it whatever you want, all right? I apologize if I lack the vernacular to articulate it any better, but essentially, I feel like we just dealt the hand, you know, we just played the hand we were dealt, so to speak. You got a teacher you couldn't connect with, you got a teacher you didn't get along with, it was what it was, and you just dealt with it. You rolled with the punches and you kept on going. That being said, not to diminish Stace's comment, but to, you know, kind of go back and forth around it, right? Like duck, duck, goose, or musical chairs, if you will. How many kids are overly diagnosed? How many kids are diagnosed that don't necessarily need a diagnosis? How many parents are dying for a diagnosis so that it can maybe in some way, shape, or form absolve them of responsibility of being a parent because, oh, it's not my fault, my kid's special? I don't know. Is it possible some teachers don't connect? Is it, you know, even myself as an educator of some sort, right? Yesterday I had 37 students, 35 males, 2 females, sexual preference unknown, all of which were from the same branch of service. I didn't have different branches of service, but I had 37 individuals potentially from 37 different areas of the United States, going in 37 different directions with 37 different military experiences. Why does my nose always itch like that? I apologize. And I could just tell, to include, we get these sheets back at the end of the day, and you can kind of get a feel for the class based on how they respond on these sheets. These sheets aren't commentary. They're just like, hey, you know, a little bit of demographic information, you know, what are you interested in applying for? And I got to tell you, one of the things they've tried to do recently within the last year is try to break the classes down based on their goals. Like, who's going to go to a vocational school? Who's going to go, you know, who's got a job lined up? You know, like whether they're going to use their military skills or go work for the family. Who's going to go to college? Who's looking to start their own business? So they have these different tracks. What I've also learned is the people that schedule them for these tracks may not necessarily know what they're scheduling them for. So some of the students wind up in a classroom they don't really belong in. But I digress. Out of the 37 individuals I had, I could tell I didn't connect with all of them. And I make a concerted effort to try. But I've also made the realization that I'm just not going to connect with everybody. That part of the human dynamic is accepting the fact that I'm not going to connect with everybody. And I often wonder if we as a society are spending an awful lot of time trying to satisfy every little minute thing. Now here's the problem, and I'm not suggesting anything. If you're somebody that, based on your individual circumstances, hangs out in the minutia, that your individualism puts you in the minutia, puts you outside the norm, it'll probably be very near and dear to your heart. You will probably have a greater emotional investment than somebody who's not significantly in the minutia. And I hope you understand my meaning by that. Where, let's say I had 37 students, but out of 37 students, 3 of those students I could not connect with for any number of reasons. Out of the 34 remaining students, you know, I wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but, you know, they had enough wherewithal, they had enough internal discipline, they had enough, you know, self-control or whatever to just deal with it and get through the period of instruction and learn what they had to learn. While I may have had 3 sitting in the periphery that were just, for whatever reason, they couldn't tune in. They couldn't get involved. They couldn't get it. They just, whatever it was, we were so diametrically opposed that we could not get involved. I would say they probably linger in the minutia, that whatever they've got going on, whatever their individual circumstance is, they tend to go internal. That was something we used to try to guard against in the military. Some people, depending on what you do for a living, depending on the life you live, going internal may be a safe space. Going internal may, you know, be your thing. I would argue that due to your individual circumstances, you're somebody who lives in the minutia. And I'm not saying that's wrong. What I am saying is, in a broad spectrum society, right, I don't think we have the opportunity to entertain the minutia in the broad spectrum. I'll go one step further. In the public school environment, I don't think, from the feedback I hear, that we have the greatest opportunity to entertain the minutia, where perhaps even at the public school level, a more specialized facility, not to alienate, not to segregate, not to make people feel any sort of negative virtue, but where they could get the more one-on-one attention. They could be a little more free to be the minutia, all right? Whether they're bored and anxious, whether they have a bundle of energy, you know, a place where there's a little bit more freedom for the staff to exercise different methods to get across to them. And I've long since sort of advocated for that over the last few years, because when I listen to this feedback and I listen to what my wife has to say, there are certain checks and balances. There's rules and regulations they have to follow, and these rules and regulations don't allow for a lot of flexibility to try new things, which is why she keeps saying, while I potentially could try to go work for the public school system, that I would be a horrible fit because I tend to think outside the box, and that I would most likely fail and wind up just, hey, roger that, because I would resort to my military ways, which was, okay, well, outside the box isn't going to work. I need the paycheck. I need to pay the bills, keep the roof over my head, and so on and so forth. So that out of the box thinking wouldn't be well received. But I think some people might hear this and they might overly react, like, oh, you're trying to segregate the special people, you're trying to do this. And I was like, well, if you want to hear it that way, there's nothing I'm going to do to change your mind. What I'm suggesting is, if the current public school system does not necessarily provide all the necessary tools and resources to satisfy the minutia, then maybe something more oriented in that fashion could. And I hope that was clear enough. If not, somebody could respond and I could try to add clarity. Now, in addition to my other video I made where I was talking about the attacks on fan pages, where certain fan pages on Facebook and whatnot are under fire from Facebook. And, Stace, I'm going to kind of put a question out there that I wouldn't mind your feedback on. I got your comment, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. What I'm intrigued about is, and I think I mentioned it, but maybe I didn't articulate it with a good delineating feature. So I don't know if Facebook is attacking this one fan page just at random, ambiguously, like nobody came to them and said, hey, because it's a private group, which means if they were alerted, if somebody went to them, if somebody alerted them, that would have to be a member of the page, in which case my interpretation, my viewpoint is that a fan member is basically violating the sanctity of the group, violating the trust and violating the intent of the group by alerting Facebook of what they perceive to be a personal infraction to them. As in, I have a tree full of apples, thousands of apples, one goes bad. So now this one apple requires the tree to get cut down. And that's kind of where I was going with this. Like, if you're just one individual, leave the page. You physically have the capability to leave the page. You can opt out of being a member of the page. Now, specifically talking about the fandom, Stace, you said the only quote that is triggering because I'm a fan is, I'm a leaf on the wind because I don't like what comes after the line stops. I get you. The rumor has it that the reason Alan Tudyk's character was killed off was they were supposed to do 3 movies, Serenity being the first. Alan Tudyk had some contractual commitments where he wasn't going to be able to meet he wasn't able to do the other 2 films. And I believe it was the same thing with Ron Glass. So Ron Glass and Alan Tudyk had previous engagements where Josh had to modify the story to allow their characters a befitting ending that goes with the story, so they could still do the other 2 films and carry on the story. I don't know if the comic books that followed were a direct result of not doing the films, or if the comics were planned and the films were still waiting. I don't know. But Stace, I also get the opinion, or I also get the I get the idea that you're somebody that would either ignore it, or if you didn't like the page, you would leave. I don't get the idea that you're somebody that would be like, well, this is just, I have got to say something, I have got to do something, I have got to take action against this page and ensure that there are consequences. Which, because I know we're close in age, if not the same age, I'm relatively certain you're someone who understands the concept of action, reaction, actions have consequences, where you would also understand that if you don't like it and you took action, it could potentially get rid of the page altogether. So I don't feel like you're that type of person where if it really bothered you that much, you'd just leave the page. Like this Chuck page I'm on, I don't know how many there are, but the one I'm on right now, it's not as enjoyable as the Firefly page is. Because, and if I did it, I apologize immensely. Not that anybody on that page is watching my channel, but I just briefly mentioned I didn't like the ending, and oh my God, it is literally like, it's like sociopolitics. You're either conservative or liberal, red or blue. You are either pro-ending or anti-ending, and it's like, uh. So on that same video about the fan pages, I made some more comments talking about agreed upon concepts, and you had mentioned the under God issue isn't because of the faith issue for me. The issue is that the original Pledge of Allegiance did not contain the phrase under God. The original one just had one nation indivisible. Yeah, this is where you and I may differ. I'm not religious. I don't go to church. I'm not a big fan of the Quran or the Torah or the Bible. I'm not a big fan of that form of secularism. I'm a believer in some form of creation. What that is, I don't know. But I don't believe for 1 second that, first and foremost, minute particles in space were floating with inertia, and then out of nowhere, one particle somehow gained speed, collided with another, centrifugal force takes place, these little particles gain masses become, planet-sized, and then we have a sun, and then, microorganisms became macroorganisms, which became amphibians, which became humans. I think the smartest thing I've ever heard is that an outside entity potentially came along and was like, okay, you're there. You need a little help. I happen to know what I'm doing. All right. Maybe it was a fun experiment. Maybe it was done with intent. I don't know. But the whole singular God concept is not really my bag of tea. That being said, it's not such a big issue that I can't say the Pledge of Allegiance, because minus that one word and all the weight it may bear for certain individuals, for me, it's the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag representing our country that is not free of imperfections. Like almost every other nation state, we have our imperfections, we have our flaws, we have our scars, all right? Our inception was not one of purity. Even the people that called themselves the Puritans that came over here were wrought with frailty, wrought with bigotry and hypocrisy. But I still think, as a whole, we're doing pretty good compared to other places. We have a lot of what everybody else has. We have corruption, we have this, that, or the other. But I think as a whole, as big as we are, for the landmass we cover, the amount of people we govern, I still think we're doing pretty good. And I may be biased because I served in the military. But, I enjoy America and what America is supposed to represent, and I'm concerned of where it's going. And I'll leave you with one other thing, Stace, that I'm kind of curious about. When I go to the gym, I can't watch the news. I can't watch anything on TV, whether it's sports, whether it's news. There's always something up there that's divisive, socio-political. It just drives me nuts. So I listen to music, or more recently I've been doing YouTube music, where I watch videos and whatnot. And I've really gotten into these videos with, instead of videos, they're lyric videos. So like a fan will take an artist and a song, and they'll put the lyrics to like some sort of PowerPoint or whatnot. And I was listening to a band, Metal Church. Now, if you're not a metalhead, you've probably never heard of them. But I was listening to Metal Church off of their album, what was it? Came out in the early 90s. It was right after Blessing in Disguise, Human Factor. I was listening to one of the songs, what was it? Not Harm's Way. Oh, God. I'll end up sitting here forever trying to figure it out. But anyways, one of the lyrics caught my attention because it was almost like real life imitating art. And as I look back, as I catch content, whether it's a song, whether it's a television show, because my wife and I have been watching older television shows, and there was a lyric that said something to the effect of, if you abuse your freedoms and if you complain about your freedoms will be taken away. And I just found that very prophetic, as in, look what's currently happening right now. We have people complaining about the First Amendment, as in we need to censor, we need to outlaw things. We have people complaining about the Second Amendment. You know, what other amendments are under attack, right? And it's like, in America, you have the freedom to be as legally absurd as you want to. You have the right to protest. You have the right to challenge your government. We have the freedom of press. We have the freedom to say just about anything as long as it's legally allowed. And now we're trying to create more laws to suppress what you're legally allowed to say. You can be hateful and take advantage of free speech. Your speech can be hateful, but there's technically no such thing as hate speech. You can be a hateful person that says hateful things, but I think if we start to give things labels, it's a very slippery slope, because the powers that be could easily change, and the people who once voted for hate speech could find themselves on the other end of it. And that's what I've also noticed, is the people clamoring for the most change due to the most hate in their heart, saying there's all this and there's all that, don't realize how easily they are consumed by their own hatred. So I'm curious to hear what you have to think about that. Anybody else watching my channel? If you're new, look, I don't care about the likes, I don't care about the subscriptions or the notification bells or whatever. I'm really just trying to increase conversation with people. We don't have to agree on everything. I'm sorry, I'm not a shock jock. I'm not a dumpster fire looking for fuel. All right, I'm not trying to be sensational. All right, I think there's enough people being sensational, enough people being shocking. I think there's enough people being divisive. I'm just trying to show that we could potentially disagree on subjects and still find a way to get along with each other, because some of the subjects we may disagree on don't really affect the other person. You'd be surprised. But I am just more interested in communicating and hearing back from you. So if you leave a comment, I promise I will read, react, and respond to it. And if you leave a comment, I appreciate it. You're awesome. Till next time.